Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the second session of today. My name is Dariusz Brasek. I'm from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and I'll have pleasure, privilege, and honor to moderate this session. The title of this session is Mining and Corporate Social Responsibility, Challenges and Solutions. We have four distinguished speakers who I'm sure will say that this topic is difficult, is relatively new to the region. We are all talking about this. We have been talking for a while, but are we doing enough? Are we really engaging in sufficient manner to address social issues associated with mining development and operation? We heard over these past 2 days a number of times how important it is to engage with stakeholders, how important it is to consult at various stages in decision making. So I'm sure that we will have a lively discussion and we'll have interesting presentations. So without further ado, let me introduce the first speaker. The first speaker is Anna Šahnazaryyan, who is representing here Save Teghut movement. But Anna is also a strong promoter of nature conservation and a dedicated researcher on ecotourism in Armenia. Her presentation will be about social issues in mining community in Armenia. Anna, the floor is yours.
Բարև ձեզ, շնորհակալ եմ ելույթի հնարավորություն տալու համար, ներողություն պիտի խնդրեմ հայերեն լսող հանդիսատեսից, ես շարունակել եմ իմ ելույթը անգլերեն. I will continue in English, thank you very much. Okay, it's really tough after yesterday's, but I promise I'm not going to scream and I'm not going to yell. In fact, I think that screaming and yelling is the wrong way of communication. It's really hard to keep emotions from getting sky high when you're really dealing with people like Armen Movsisyan, like the Minister of Nature Protection, Hankarդյունաբերություն. In fact, it's absolutely difficult to deal with somebody like Armen Movsisyan, who can be considered one of the most heinous criminals of modern days Armenia's history. A person who not only licenses mines to himself, and not only signs all these mining contracts and licenses to everyone, a person who actually sold the country to a mining corporation. With his signature, Armenia basically became like a property of this, one of the largest mining companies in the world, Gazprom. So you can't really be calm and not scream. And that's actually the best you could do, if not put him in jail. So with some people like him, it's really tough. In fact, just speaking about the Russians also own mines. I was wondering where they are in this conference because, they're supposed to be interested in responsible mining. Well, maybe they're just not, they're always out of the law. Anyway, I think communication is very important, and I think dialogue is also very important on this issue that involves one of the most, fierce conflicts. Environmental conflicts are one of the most fierce ones all over the world, and it's not just Armenia, where you have these two absolutely opposite sides fighting with each other. So indeed, there is a need to sit down and to talk and find a resolution to this conflict. But I won't be, saying something very surprising if I say, for sitting and talking and for this effective dialogue, at least trying to approach towards a resolution, you need a neutral place. And you need absolutely neutral negotiators or mediators. And here is where the problem with this conference arises. This conference is organized and supported by entities who cannot be perceived as neutral, unbiased, and without self-interest. The government, the World Bank, nor the countries of those, the diplomatic missions of those countries that have presence of mining companies in this country, private interests, they cannot be perceived neutral. So it's really hard to actually, acknowledge this conference as a space where we can come and calmly, quietly start negotiating and talking and being in a dialogue. The government, it's not neutral because it just doesn't even follow a public policy that is neutral. It's only following a policy that it thinks is good, and it only thinks it's good because it's paid well. So the government cannot be neutral on the issue of mining because they don't even have a neutral way of regulating that area. The government has also, they created all these quasi-whatever institutes that actually belong to mining companies, those that are supposed to present or make, let's say, environmental impact assessments, or they're supposed to make, these assessments of natural resource, calculations, etc. They actually belong. They sold them to mining companies. Like just one example, the Institute of Metallurgy. It just belongs to one of the mining companies, Valex Group. It's part of Valex Group. It cannot possibly be any neutral. Government is not neutral. The embassies with, like I said, with presence of mining companies, they cannot be perceived neutral, at least by me. And the World Bank cannot be perceived neutral either, because it's really promoting the mining agenda in this country. Let me go to some of the things and share with you some of the things that make environmentalists like myself extremely irritated. So there are these three things that I think are the priority. One is the World Bank, the second is corruption, and the third one is hypocrisy. So the World Bank, this huge machinery that has been running the world for 50, 60 years for the sake of development, has failed this development agenda, basically. Can be doing some good things, but especially for the environmentalist community, it's one of the names that really irritates to the bone. It took decades for environmentalists to get environmental standards as part of the World Bank policies. Just decades. Now it has some of these standards. It is, they're poised to be one of the most, the highest, one of the most strict ones, but in reality they're not. If you especially compare with those countries' environmental standards that can be considered to have best practices in mining, those standards that are particularly related to mining are much lower. And I'm not going to go into, trying to bring evidence and try to prove. About, IFC that is, making investments in, let's say, in this case, the mining sector, making investments with its organizational mission, which is, to help countries developing or even not developed countries to develop, and who is promoting and saying that, well, whatever we're doing is going to do good to the country and develop it. I want to just bring up the example of where IFC's majority of investments are. Let's say in mining, almost 60% of these investments are in sub-Saharan Africa. And sub-Saharan Africa is one of the regions all over the world that suffers one of the worst human development situation, indicators. Sub-Saharan Africa that has been, let's say, quote-unquote, enjoying World Bank or IFC support, loans, or investments for 40 years has been not developing. They have had that mining, but they didn't become better off. Poverty didn't decrease there. So these these two institutions' names, or generally, they really irritate us. So organizing this conference has been irritating. The other thing, the corruption thing, is one of the other things that really irritates us, and it's no doubt that these countries' government is corrupt. Just open, one of the very few independent media reports, let's say investigative reports, and read about the number of, corrupt deals, transactions, contracting yourself as a government donor. I mean, corruption is not news in this country. And I wish this donor approach to Armenia would have been, like the MCA did, the Millennium Challenge account, when they, they had democracy or good governance actually as one of their preconditions for support. And they actually stopped that. They basically slapped in the face of Kocharyan after March 1st, and they were right. And I know that for the World Bank, for example, I mean, this community that is trying to lobby things for this big institution, they have failed. They have not been able for decades to get good governance as one of the conditions for whatever they're doing in developing countries. Okay, so yes, corruption is one of these things, and when you think about this donor-receiver situation, I have to bring up the case of like this metaphoric comparison. Okay, this situation of a drug deal. When a drug dealer is selling drugs to the drug user, who's there to blame? I mean, who's making actually crime? I think it's like common sense to say both are, to blame. But I'm sure that in these discussions, a lot of the, let's say, mining companies will stand up and say, well, it's not our fault, we're trying to follow the best, the rules of this country. I mean, it's not our fault that their government is not coming and doing all these monitorings or whatever. They will definitely say that. And I'm sure that the donors will also say, well, your nation, your state, your government, that's what you are, what can we do? Again, just remember about this comparison of the drug deal. Who's to blame in this deal situation? Now, the third thing, hypocrisy, that really irritates us is that, yes, things can be absolutely bad, but we shouldn't be lying about them. Like, yesterday, the Minister of Environment, making this blatant, outright lies in front of me when I was just asking a question that is a fact, a written, documented fact. He was lying. And that's even, worse. Hypocrisy in this situation, in organizing a conference, and entitling it responsible mining is, something that, again, falls under this line of hypocrisy, is that, yes, responsible mining is something that is really related to that, private, the corporate part. I mean, you don't say responsible government in relation to mining. Government is government. It's already in its powers and it's already in its actually duty and obligation to make sure that it's monitoring, it's doing all the best for the public's interest. So you don't call the government responsible government in mining. This is really something that is about the companies, the private companies. So they have thought of this. Some would say this is a corporate, let's say, oxymoron, this is a PR word or whatever. I'm not going to go into that debate. But this is something that is really related and very much attributed to the companies, and we should be really fair about that and say, okay, well, this is a conference for the companies mostly, and we're going to hear their words. And if you wanted this to be like a dialogue, you could have named it differently. You could have just called it differently. I'm really happy that the organizers listened to some smart people who said you can't call this sustainable mining because it just doesn't exist. And it's a corporate oxymoron. Yes, just be fair with whatever you're doing and honest. Just don't be hypocritical. I started this speech, and I started with talking about things that are not my topic, I was supposed to talk about the social issues in mining communities in Armenia. Now, what do you expect me to do? Do you expect me to, show these photos of poor villages, with no infrastructure that have had mining for a long time or a more shorter period of time? Do you expect me to show photos of children from Kajaran area, from these villages, with no teeth? Children's, research study results about how much heavy metals is contained in their hair or in their other, bones or other cells of the body? Do you expect me to show, these rivers polluted? These rivers where, the mining waste is, making them a sewage channel, and from which actually cattle are drinking? Do you expect me to show you pictures of these milk company, dairy production companies and the milk that we drink, of cattle that actually graze on a tailing dam that has been covered with soil? Do you expect me to bring these examples of health data? I mean, how, in what adverse health conditions communities are, and especially the mining, or the data about cancer, the data about lung cancer? And it's not just about the metal mines, by the way. The stone mines are also having a very bad health impact, especially through that dust. So, we shouldn't be forgetting those. So I decided not to actually do that presentation and show you what the situation is in those communities. Now, there are some mining companies here who will, stand up and say, oh, you know what, we built this kindergarten roof in our community. Well, good for you. We did whatever renovation of a school, good for you. What was beyond that? There we have to understand that that's how cheap the social, quote-unquote, social contract is in this country. That's how cheap you can get a community agree, or even, this is not, again, a situation where you can legally say their agreement is binding. The legislation is made in such a way that you can do hearings in the community, but it's not really saying stone fixed that if the community says no, then it's a no. We don't have yet any single case in this country when a mining project was to be discussed and the community said, no, and this mining permission was not given. And the communities are not even entitled with the rights, for example, to do a referendum, and the referendum will stand. And that's one of the big differences. Now we're going to discuss, the best practice countries examples. For example, let's say Canada or Australia. Australia is really amazing with the number of communities that have made these referendums and have made these, community actions and have been able to establish their areas free zones, free of, for example, hydraulic gas mining. So, a country where the official data says that 36% of the population lives just under $3, like 40,000 dirhams, which is actually the minimum consumption basket of this country. So we don't know how many are the people who get just 1,000 rounds more. Anyway, so people who are, living in these conditions, it's very cheap to get the social contract. Now, one of the other problems with this conference is that it has just jumped over so many issues, discussion of so many issues, and has come to discuss, something that the companies should be doing, like, the responsible miners, without having covered all the way, the legislation, what doesn't allow us to have safe economic activities, including mining in this country. the access to justice for actually questioning the legality of most of these licensing contracts or commissions, whatever they are. The health situation, let's really discuss the issue with health and what the government is able to do with the health. In fact, maybe it was the World Bank austerity, policy suggestions and recommendations or whatever it was. But this country's government just 1 year ago or a year and a half ago excluded, just took out one of the lethal diseases, cancer, out of the state program. There's the state health program that covers for certain diseases, and all social groups can apply and get it. They took it out. Now, you really have to be this very poor and vulnerable social group to be able to apply to the government and get their eligibility for some health. But cancer has been out of the health program, the subsidy program. Now, we have so much mining. It's world proven that mining, especially in this situation with heavy metals in the food chain of most of the communities, does cause cancer and other diseases, cardiovascular and other diseases. Okay, I'm not going to speak about that. You call the specialists who will talk about this. So these things haven't been discussed. And what the government or the company should have been doing about this. And I'm not talking about, some of the companies that will come again, stand up again and say, 2 years ago we started doing health insurance for our workers. I'm not talking about just the health insurance of workers. I'm talking about the bigger impact that mining has on people's, the population's health. So, without having discussed those things, and especially the things that are related about the government's role, and yesterday was the most vivid evidence. The government representatives just showed up for the opening of the conference. They did the show, basically, and they left. They didn't stay here. They're not going to learn this best practice. Who are you showing the best practice to? Why? Next speech is going to be, from Australia. Why is he going to speak about social responsibility and corporate responsibility? Why? Who's going to listen to that if not the government? And they're not here. So, hypocrisy again. Of course, it's very important to continue talking about these things. And I'm really sorry that I have this attitude that this is not a neutral place. That's my feeling. You can't deny it. It's my feeling. It's not a neutral place. And this is one of the reasons why we came up with a statement yesterday. And this is one of the reasons why we did an alternative conference that we actually didn't fully do. We will continue posting some materials online about this alternative conference speakers. But yes, these are one of the reasons why it came out to be like this. And one thing that is to be noted for the future, if we are going to establish this neutral space, the neutral mediators, and the neutral, institution that is supposed to speak about these issues, we really have to make this very important, criterion or value inherent to this institution or space. It has to only be guided by public interest and the utmost purpose of human development. Human development meaning not income growth or financial growth. Human development in the broadest and the most true sense of the word. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this passionate statement. We all listened to you very